Hello horror lovers, welcome to the channel. Before the terror begins, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, as it will help me a lot. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this, because the first thing I noticed was the pain. It radiated through my skull, pulsing with each beat of my heart. I struggled to open my eyes, the world around me a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes. "She's waking up," a gruff voice called out. "Quick, call for help." As my vision slowly cleared, I found myself staring up at a canopy of pine trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The scent of earth and pine needles filled my nostrils, mixed with something metallic and unsettling. Unfamiliar faces swam into view, 3 men dressed in hunting gear, their expressions a mixture of concern and unease. "Miss, can you hear me?" one of them asked, his weathered face creased with worry. "Are you all right?" I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw and parched. Only a weak croak escaped my lips. "Water," I managed to whisper. One of the men quickly produced a canteen, gently lifting my head to help me drink. The cool liquid was a balm to my throat, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. As I became more aware of my surroundings, a creeping sense of dread began to take hold. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here or why I was lying on the forest floor. Even more terrifying, I couldn't remember who I was. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How did I get here?" The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. "We were hoping you could tell us, miss," the oldest of the group said. "We found you unconscious in this clearing. Do you remember anything at all?" I shook my head, wincing at the movement. "No, I can't remember anything." As I tried to sit up, a wave of nausea washed over me. That's when I noticed the blood. It soaked the ground beneath me, staining my clothes and matting my hair. "Oh God," I gasped, panic rising in my chest. Is this my blood?" "Easy now," one of the hunters soothed, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "We've called for help. Just try to stay calm." But calm was the last thing I felt. My heart raced as I looked around the clearing, searching for any clue to explain my situation. The trees seemed to loom over me, their shadows hiding untold secrets. "What's your name, miss?" the youngest hunter asked, clearly trying to distract me. I opened my mouth to answer, but no name came. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had no idea who I was. I don't know," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I can't remember my name. I can't remember anything." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the air, bringing both relief and a new wave of fear. As the paramedics arrived and began to assess my condition, I caught snippets of their concerned whispers. Severe head trauma, possible memory loss, signs of struggle. The world began to spin as they lifted me onto a stretcher. As consciousness slipped away, one thought echoed in my mind. What horrors had I forgotten, and did I really want to remember? The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was my own reflection in a paramedic's glasses, a stranger's face pale and bloodied, staring back at me with terrified eyes. The sterile hospital room felt like a prison. White walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and the antiseptic smell all served as constant reminders that I was trapped, not just physically, but within the confines of my own fractured mind. A gentle knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. A man in a rumpled suit entered, his tired eyes softening as he approached my bed. "Hello, I'm Detective Morrow," he said, pulling up a chair. "How are you feeling today?" I let out a bitter laugh. "How do you think I'm feeling? I can't remember my own name, let alone what happened to me." The detective nodded sympathetically. "I understand this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?" I shrugged, resigned. "Go ahead. Not that I'll be much help." "Let's start simple," he said. "What's the first thing you remember after waking up in the forest?" I closed my eyes, trying to focus. Pain. confusion, the smell of pine and blood. A shudder ran through me. There were men. Hunters, I think. They found me. Detective Morrow jotted something in his notebook. Good. That matches their statements. Now, do you remember anything from before that? Any flashes or fragments? I shook my head, frustration building. No, it's all just blank. Like my life began in that clearing. The detective's questions continued, each one serving as a painful reminder of how little I knew. As our session wound down, a nurse entered with a stack of medical files. "Excuse me," she said, "but the doctor wanted me to inform you that all the test results are back." Hope flared in my chest. And? Did they find anything? The nurse's expression fell slightly. "I'm afraid not. There's no physical explanation for your memory loss. The doctor believes it's psychological, likely due to trauma." My heart sank. Even my own body was keeping secrets from me. As the nurse left, Detective Morrow stood to leave. "We'll keep investigating," he assured me. "In the meantime, try to rest. Your family should be here soon." "My family?" I echoed, a mixture of anticipation and dread filling me. Before he could respond, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. A middle-aged couple burst into the room, their faces etched with worry and relief. "Jenny? Oh, thank God you're all right," the woman cried, rushing to my bedside. I recoiled instinctively, overwhelmed by the stranger's embrace. The man, presumably my father, noticed my reaction and gently pulled the woman back. "Easy, Martha," he said softly. "Remember what the doctors said. She doesn't remember us." The pain in his voice was palpable, matched only by the ache in my chest as I stared at these people who clearly loved me, people I couldn't recognize. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I wish I could remember you." As the detective quietly excused himself, my apparent parents pulled up chairs, determination replacing the hurt in their eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," my mother said, reaching for my hand. "We're here now, and we'll help you through this. We'll tell you everything about your life, about who you are." I nodded, managing a weak smile, but inside I was screaming. Who was I? What had happened to me? And why did I have a gnawing feeling that some things were better left forgotten? As night fell and my parents reluctantly left, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded me, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. In the quiet darkness, I could almost hear the whisper of secrets, lurking just beyond my reach, waiting to be uncovered. The forest called to me in my dreams, a siren song I couldn't ignore. Towering pines swayed in a ghostly breeze, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I wandered through the misty undergrowth, drawn deeper into the heart of the woods by an unseen force. Suddenly the mist parted, revealing a moonlit clearing. My heart stopped. The ground was saturated with blood, dark and glistening in the pale light. Bodies lay strewn about like broken dolls, their vacant eyes staring accusingly at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. As I turned to run, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a pool of blood. My own face stared back, eyes wild and hands dripping red. I jolted awake with a strangled cry, my hospital gown soaked with sweat. The heart monitor beside my bed beeped frantically, matching the frenzied rhythm in my chest. A nurse rushed in, her face etched with concern. "Jenny, are you all right?" I shook my head, gasping for air. The forest, so much blood. The nurse's expression softened as she checked my vitals. "It was just a nightmare, dear. You're safe here." But it hadn't felt like just a nightmare. The images were too vivid, too real. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I knew I had to tell someone about what I'd seen. Later that morning, Detective Morrow returned for another round of questions. I seized the opportunity to share my vision. Detective, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I had a dream last night, but it felt more like a memory. He leaned forward, interest piqued. Go on. I described the blood-soaked clearing, the bodies, and the overwhelming sense of dread. As I spoke, the detective's expression grew increasingly troubled. Jenny, he said carefully when I finished, I have to ask, are you sure this was just a dream? Could it be a memory of what happened to you in the forest? I shrugged helplessly. I don't know. It felt so real, but... I trailed off, frustrated by my inability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Detective Morrow jotted some notes, his brow furrowed. I'll look into this. It might be nothing, but if there's any chance it's connected to what happened to you, we need to investigate. As he stood to leave, I caught a snippet of conversation between two nurses passing by my open door. Heard they found more bodies in the woods. Some kind of massacre, they're saying. My blood ran cold. Detective, I called out, my voice urgent. Did you hear that? About more bodies in the forest? He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed and closed the door. I didn't want to worry you, he began. But yes, there's been a development in the case. We've discovered a site in the forest that appears to have been used for some kind of ritual. Multiple bodies were found. The room seemed to spin around me as the implications sank in. My dream, the blood, the bodies, it wasn't just a nightmare. Somehow, I had been there. Am I the only survivor? I whispered, dreading the answer. Detective Morrow's grim expression told me everything I needed to know. As far as we can tell, yes. Which makes your testimony crucial, Jenny. We need to figure out what happened in those woods. As he left, promising to return soon, I was hit by a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief at finally having some connection to my past warred with horror at what that past might contain. Determination to uncover the truth battled with fear of what I might discover. One thing was certain. The answers I sought lay in the forest. And whether I liked it or not, I was bound to that place by bonds of blood and forgotten memories. As I closed my eyes, the whisper of pine needles echoed in my mind, calling me back to the scene of unimaginable horrors. The taste of freedom was bittersweet as I stepped out of the hospital, squinting in the bright sunlight. After weeks of tests, questions, and frustrating dead ends, the doctors had finally deemed me well enough to leave, physically at least. My mind remained a locked box, stubbornly refusing to yield its secrets. Ready to go home, sweetheart? My mother asked, her smile strained but hopeful. Home. The word felt hollow, meaningless. How could I go home to a place I didn't remember? Yeah, I guess so, I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The car ride was filled with an awkward silence, punctuated by my parents' attempts at small talk. They pointed out landmarks, shared anecdotes about my childhood, desperate to spark some flicker of recognition. But their words washed over me like water off glass, leaving no impression. As we pulled into the driveway of a modest two-story house, my father turned to me with a gentle smile. Welcome home, Jenny. I nodded, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. This place should mean something to me, but it was as unfamiliar as a movie set. Inside, I wandered from room to room, running my fingers over furniture and knickknacks that held no significance for me. Family photos lined the walls, showing a smiling girl who shared my face but felt like a stranger. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right, my mother said softly. We haven't changed anything. We thought it might help you remember. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Pushing open the door, I stepped into a time capsule of a life I couldn't recall. Posters of bands I didn't recognize covered the walls. Shelves lined with books and trinkets told the story of interests and hobbies now lost to me. A desk in the corner held framed photos of friends whose names I couldn't remember. As I moved further into the room, a familiar scent stopped me in my tracks. My eyes landed on a small vase by the bedside, filled with fresh pine needles. The scent transported me instantly, flashes of my dream, or was it a memory, flooding my mind. Blood-soaked earth, moonlight glinting off ritual daggers, chanting voices in the darkness. "Jenny?" My father's voice snapped me back to reality. "Are you okay? You look pale." I forced another smile. "I'm fine, just overwhelmed, I guess. Is it okay if I have some time alone?" He nodded understandingly. "Of course. We'll be downstairs if you need anything." As soon as the door closed behind him, I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking. The pine scent seemed to fill the room now, cloying and oppressive. I needed answers. My eyes fell on a laptop on the desk. Booting it up, I was relieved to find it unlocked. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I searched for news about the forest incident. Article after article popped up, each more horrifying than the last. "Ritual site discovered in local forest," one headline blared. "Multiple bodies found in apparent cult massacre," declared another. My breath caught as I read the details. A clearing deep in the woods, evidence of occult rituals, bodies bearing signs of ritualistic sacrifice, and buried in one article, a single line that made my blood run cold. "Authorities are searching for any information about a potential survivor, believed to be a young woman." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me slam the laptop shut, my heart racing. As my mother's voice called out that dinner was ready, I sat frozen, the weight of my newfound knowledge pressing down on me. I was the sole survivor of something unimaginably horrific. But why couldn't I remember? And more importantly, was I truly safe, or was the nightmare far from over? As I made my way downstairs, forcing a semblance of normalcy, one thought echoed in my mind. I had to go back to the forest. Whatever answers I sought, whatever truth lay hidden in my fractured memories, I knew with certainty that I would find them there, among the pines and shadows. The soft glow of the laptop screen illuminated my face in the darkened room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through article after article, each one more horrifying than the last. "Gruesome discovery in Oakwood Forest," one headline screamed. My eyes darted over the text, heart pounding with each word. Local authorities were alerted to a disturbing scene deep within Oakwood Forest on Tuesday morning. What they found has left the community reeling and raised troubling questions about cult activity in the area. A wave of nausea washed over me as I continued reading. The article described a clearing, much like the one from my dreams, where multiple bodies had been discovered. The details were sparse, but the implication was clear. This was no ordinary crime scene. Evidence suggests the site was used for ritualistic purposes. The article continued. Detective Sarah Morrow, lead investigator on the case, stated that the scene bore hallmarks of occult activity. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the detective's name. She had questioned me in the hospital, her eyes searching mine for answers I couldn't give. Now I understood the gravity behind her inquiries. As I delved deeper into the rabbit hole of information, a pattern emerged. This wasn't an isolated incident. Similar scenes had been discovered in forests across the country over the past few years, always with the same ritualistic elements. One paragraph in particular made my blood run cold. "Authorities are particularly interested in locating a potential survivor, believed to be a young woman found near the site. Sources close to the investigation suggest she may hold key information about the perpetrators." My stomach churned as the realization hit me. I was that survivor, the sole witness to whatever horrors had transpired in that blood-soaked clearing. "Jenny, are you still awake?" My mother's voice, muffled by the closed door, startled me from my dark reverie. Yeah, Mom. Just reading," I called back, quickly minimizing the browser window. "All right, sweetie. Try to get some sleep, okay? It's been a big day." I murmured in agreement, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. As her footsteps receded down the hall, I reopened the articles, driven by a morbid need to know more. Hours passed as I pieced together the horrifying puzzle. The cult, if that's what it was, seemed to target young people. Many of the victims were around my age, snatched from their normal lives to meet a gruesome fate in the woods. But why had I survived? And more importantly, why couldn't I remember anything? A soft ping from the laptop jolted me from my thoughts. A new email notification popped up from an address I didn't recognize. With trembling fingers, I clicked it open. The message contained only 4 words. Remember the pine needles. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced at the vase on my bedside table, the fresh pine needles seeming to mock me with their presence. How did the sender know? Who were they? Before I could ponder further, a flash of memory hit me like a physical blow. Chanting voices, the glint of a ritual dagger, the smell of blood mixing with pine. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. As I slumped against the cold tile floor, tears streaming down my face, I knew with grim certainty that this was only the beginning. Whatever dark forces were at play, they weren't finished with me yet. And as the first rays of dawn crept through the window, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Little did I know, the price of that knowledge would be higher than I could ever imagine. The forest loomed before me, a wall of green that seemed to pulse with hidden secrets. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor that shifted and swayed with the breeze. I stood at the trailhead, my heart pounding in my chest, drawn by an inexplicable urge to return to the scene of my forgotten trauma. "You can do this, Jenny," I whispered to myself, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the path. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils, triggering a cascade of half-formed memories. Flashes of moonlight on steel, the acrid smell of smoke, muffled screams. I shook my head, trying to clear the disturbing images. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. The path twisted and turned, leading me further into the heart of the forest. With each step, the feeling of familiarity grew stronger. Suddenly I emerged into a clearing and my heart nearly stopped. This was it. The place from my dreams, from my fractured memories. The ground was covered in leaf litter now, hiding any evidence of the horrors that had occurred here. But I knew with bone-deep certainty that this was where I had been found. "Oh God," I breathed, my legs trembling as I took in the scene. Flashes of memory assaulted my senses. The metallic tang of blood filled my nostrils. Screams echoed in my ears. I saw flashes of faces contorted in terror, felt the bite of ropes on my wrists, heard the rhythmic chanting of unseen voices. "No, no, no," I whimpered, falling to my knees as the memories overwhelmed me. The visions came faster now, a horrific slideshow of violence and ritual. I saw hooded figures circling a stone altar, their chants rising to a fevered pitch. I felt the cold bite of a blade against my skin, saw the terror in the eyes of others bound and waiting their turn. "Stop!" I screamed, clutching my head as if I could physically force the memories away. "Hey, are you okay?" A concerned voice cut through my panic. I looked up, blinking away tears, to see a hiker standing at the edge of the clearing. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and a worried expression. I'm fine," I stammered, struggling to my feet. Just, lost my footing." The man didn't look convinced. "Are you sure? You look pretty shaken up. Do you need help getting back to the trailhead?" I shook my head, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "No, thank you. I just need a moment." He hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to help and respecting my wishes. "Well, if you're sure, just be careful out here, okay? These woods can be tricky if you don't know them well." I nodded, watching as he reluctantly continued on his way. As soon as he was out of sight, I slumped against a nearby tree, my legs weak and shaking. Shame burned within me at my inability to explain, to share the horrors that were slowly resurfacing in my mind. How could I tell a stranger that I was reliving a massacre? that I was the sole survivor of some twisted ritual that I still couldn't fully remember. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I realized I had a choice to make. I could run from these memories, try to bury them again, and return to the safety of my new amnesiac life. Or I could face them head-on, no matter how terrifying, and uncover the truth about what had happened in this clearing. With a deep breath, I pushed myself off the tree, my resolve hardening. I would not be a victim again. Whatever dark secrets this forest held, whatever horrors my mind had locked away, I would face them, for myself, and for those who hadn't survived that night. As I made my way back to the trailhead, a new determination burned within me. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of my mind and the depths of these woods, and I would find it, no matter the cost. The sun was setting as I left the forest, casting long shadows across the road. My mind was reeling from the flood of fragmented memories, each one more disturbing than the last. As I walked towards my car, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. That's when I noticed it. A sleek black sedan parked a little way down the road. As I approached my own vehicle, the sedan's engine purred to life. Trying to appear casual, I got into my car and pulled out onto the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw the black car follow. "It's nothing," I muttered to myself. "You're just being paranoid." But as I turned onto the main road and the car remained behind me, my heart began to race. I took a series of random turns, hoping to lose them, but the sedan stayed stubbornly on my tail. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the black car cruised slowly past, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants. I sat in my car, hands shaking, until long after it had disappeared from view. Inside the house, every creak and groan made me jump. I double-checked all the locks, drawing the curtains tight. As night fell, sleep eluded me. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. The next morning, bleary-eyed and on edge, I made my way to the kitchen. My mother was there, humming as she prepared breakfast. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, her smile faltering as she took in my haggard appearance. "Are you feeling all right?" I forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well. Mom, do you think it's possible someone might be watching me?" Her brow furrowed with concern. "Watching you? Why would you think that?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I have this feeling, like I'm being followed." My mother's face paled slightly. "Jenny, honey, I'm sure it's nothing. But if you're really worried, we could talk to Detective Morrow." The mention of the detective sparked an idea. "Actually, there's someone else I'd like to talk to. Do you know if there are any therapists in town who specialize in memory recovery?" A flicker of something, relief, worry, passed over my mother's face. "I think there's a Dr. Evelyn Carter who does that kind of work. Are you sure that's what you want?" I nodded firmly. "I need to remember, Mom. I can't keep living like this with all these gaps in my mind." A few phone calls later, I had an appointment scheduled with Dr. Carter for that afternoon. As I sat in her warmly lit office, surrounded by calming artwork and the soft burble of a water feature, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Dr. Carter, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a soothing voice, listened intently as I explained my situation. "Memory loss due to trauma is complex, Jenny," she said when I finished. "But there are techniques we can use to help recover those memories. Have you ever considered hypnosis?" I hesitated. "Is it safe?" She nodded reassuringly. "When done properly, yes. It can be a powerful tool for accessing buried memories. However, I must warn you, the process can be intense, and there's no guarantee of what we might uncover." Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. I want to try. I need to know what happened to me. Dr. Carter's expression turned serious. "All right, Jenny. We'll start with a light trance today, just to see how you respond. Are you ready?" As I reclined in the comfortable chair, Listening to Dr. Carter's soothing voice guide me into a trance state, I felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. What horrors awaited me in the locked rooms of my mind? And was I truly prepared to face them? Little did I know the answers I sought would shake the very foundations of my world and put me on a collision course with forces I could scarcely imagine. Doctor. Carter's voice faded to a gentle murmur as I slipped deeper into the hypnotic trance. The office around me seemed to dissolve, replaced by a swirling darkness that gradually coalesced into a familiar scene. I found myself back in the forest clearing, but this time it was night. Flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows across the faces of hooded figures surrounding me. The acrid scent of smoke mingled with the earthy smell of the forest floor. I tried to move, but my wrists were bound tightly behind my back. "Remember, Jenny," Dr. Carter's disembodied voice echoed in my mind. "You're safe. This is just a memory. You can observe without reliving the trauma." I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to focus on the details around me. The rough texture of rope against my skin, the cool night air on my face, the rhythmic chanting that seemed to pulse through the clearing. Suddenly, a hooded figure approached, holding an ornate dagger that glinted in the candlelight. My heart raced as they raised the blade, but instead of striking me, they moved to a person beside me. A young man, his eyes wide with terror. "No," I heard myself scream, but it was too late. The dagger plunged down and warm blood sprayed across my face. I jolted back to awareness, gasping for air. Dr. Carter was there immediately, her voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe, Jenny. You're in my office. It's over now." Tears streamed down my face as the full horror of what I'd witnessed settled over me. "It was real," I choked out. "All of it. The ritual, the sacrifices. I saw it happen." Dr. Carter handed me a tissue, her expression grave. "What you experienced was clearly a traumatic event. Can you tell me more about what you saw?" I recounted the vision in halting words, each detail bringing fresh waves of nausea and fear. When I finished, Dr. Carter sat back, her brow furrowed in concern. "Jenny, what you're describing sounds like a highly organized and dangerous cult activity. I think it's crucial that we inform Detective Morrow about this." I nodded, still shaken. "But why can't I remember more? Why just this one fragment?" "The mind often protects itself from severe trauma by compartmentalizing memories," Dr. Carter explained. "What we've uncovered today is likely just the tip of the iceberg. With more sessions, we may be able to piece together more of what happened." As I left Dr. Carter's office, my mind reeling from the session, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief at finally having some concrete memory to grasp on to ward with horror at the content of that memory. And underneath it all, a growing determination to uncover the full truth. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street from the office building. As I approached my car, the sedan's engine rumbled to life. My heart pounding, I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them in my haste. Just as I unlocked my car door, a hand grasped my shoulder. I whirled around, a scream building in my throat, only to find myself face to face with Detective Morrow. "Easy, Jenny," she said, holding up her hands. "I'm sorry I startled you. Dr. Carter called me. We need to talk." As I looked from the detective to the black sedan now slowly cruising past, a chill ran down my spine. How deep did this conspiracy go? And more importantly, who could I really trust? With a mixture of fear and resolve, I nodded to Detective Morrow. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's talk." As we walked back towards the office building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was taking my first steps down a path from which there would be no return. Whatever dark truths awaited me, I was now committed to uncovering them, no matter the cost. Ilara stood at the edge of the cliff, her eyes fixed on the churning sea below. The salt-laden wind whipped her hair around her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed by the events of the past few days and the weight of the decision that lay before her. You don't have to do this, came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Darian approaching, his brow furrowed with concern. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, but close enough to reach out if needed. Elara sighed, her shoulders sagging. You know I do, Darian. There's no other way. He shook his head, taking a step closer. There's always another way. We just haven't found it yet. We're out of time, Elara replied, her voice barely audible over the crashing waves. The council made their decision. If I don't go through with this, they'll... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Darian's eyes flashed with anger. The council be damned. They've sat in their ivory towers for too long, making decisions that affect people's lives without understanding the consequences. Elara turned back to face the sea, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I understand your frustration, but we can't just ignore their authority. The balance must be maintained. At what cost? Darian challenged, moving to stand beside her. Your life, your freedom, everything you've worked for. She remained silent for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but determined. Sometimes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one. Darian's expression softened, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Elara, listen to me. You've already sacrificed so much. You don't have to bear this burden alone. She turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But I'm the only one who can. The prophecy was clear. Prophecies can be misinterpreted, Darian interrupted. And even if it is true, who's to say this is the right time, the right way? Elara opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden gust of wind cut her off. The sky darkened ominously, and in the distance a flash of lightning illuminated the horizon. We should head back, Darian said, eyeing the approaching storm warily. It's not safe up here. Elara nodded, but as they turned to leave, a piercing cry echoed across the water. They both froze, exchanging a look of disbelief. Was that? Darian began. A siren, Elara finished, her eyes wide. But they haven't been seen in these waters for centuries. Without warning, a massive wave crashed against the cliff face, sending spray high into the air. As the mist cleared, a figure could be seen perched on a rock below, a woman with iridescent scales covering her lower body and long seaweed green hair. Elara of the Coastal Kingdoms, the siren called, her voice otherworldly and hypnotic. Your presence is required beneath the waves. Darian instinctively stepped in front of Elara, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. Stay back, he warned. But Elara placed a gentle hand on his arm. Wait, she said softly. This could be the sign we've been waiting for. The siren's lips curved into a knowing smile. The tides are turning, child of the land. The old ways are stirring, and the balance shifts. Will you heed the call? Elara took a deep breath, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about her destiny was suddenly thrown into question. Was this the true path she was meant to follow? If I go with you, she called down to the siren, what becomes of my people, of the council's decree? The siren's expression turned serious. The fate of many hangs in the balance, but know this, the journey beneath the waves will change everything. The question is, are you prepared for what you might find? Elara looked back at Darian, seeing the mix of fear and support in his eyes. She squeezed his hand reassuringly before turning back to the siren. I am, she declared, her voice ringing out clear and strong despite the howling wind. The siren nodded solemnly. Then prepare yourself, Elara of the Coastal Kingdoms. When the moon reaches its zenith, meet me at the water's edge. Come alone, and come ready to leave your old life behind. With that, the siren disappeared beneath the waves, leaving Elara and Darian standing in stunned silence on the cliff. Are you sure about this? Darian asked after a long moment. Elara turned to him, a newfound determination in her eyes. No, she admitted. But I know it's what I have to do. Whatever lies beneath those waves, whatever challenges await me, I have to face them. It's the only way to truly understand my purpose, and maybe, just maybe, find a solution that saves everyone. Darian nodded, a mix of pride and worry on his face. Then I'll be here, waiting for your return, no matter how long it takes. As they made their way back down the cliff path, the storm clouds began to disperse, revealing a sky painted with the warm hues of sunset. Elara's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. She didn't know what awaited her beneath the waves, but she knew that come moonrise, her life would change forever. The tide was turning, and with it the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery path across the dark waters. Elara stood at the water's edge, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "I didn't think you'd actually come alone," a familiar voice said from behind her. Elara turned to see Darian emerging from the shadows of a nearby dune. She sighed, a mix of exasperation and fondness in her voice. "I should have known you'd follow me." He shrugged, a sheepish grin on his face. "I couldn't let you face this alone." Before Elara could respond, the water before them began to churn. The siren from earlier emerged, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. "You were told to come alone," the siren said, her voice sharp. Elara stepped forward. "He's my friend, my protector. If I'm to go with you, he comes too." The siren's eyes narrowed as she studied Darian. After a tense moment, she nodded. "Very well. But know this, son of the land. The journey ahead was not meant for you. The challenges you face may be more than you can bear." Darian stood tall, meeting the siren's gaze. "I'll take that risk." "Then enter the water," the siren commanded, "and leave your world behind." Elara and Darian exchanged a look before wading into the surf. The water was shockingly cold, and Elara gasped as it reached her waist. "Now what?" Darian asked through chattering teeth. The siren smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Now you breathe." Before either of them could react, the siren grabbed their arms and pulled them under. Elara's instincts screamed at her to hold her breath, to fight against the pull of the water. But as the surface disappeared above her, she felt a strange calm wash over her. "Breathe," a voice echoed in her mind. "Trust." Against every instinct, Elara opened her mouth and took a deep breath. Instead of choking on seawater, she felt her lungs fill with cool, crisp air. Beside her, she saw Darian's eyes widen in amazement as he experienced the same thing. "How is this possible?" Elara asked, her voice clear despite being underwater. The siren's laugh echoed around them. "Magic older than your kingdoms, child. Now come, we have far to go." As they swam deeper, following the siren's glowing form, the darkness of the ocean gave way to a world of wonder. Bioluminescent creatures drifted by, painting the water in hues of blue and purple. Schools of fish darted around them, their scales glittering like jewels. "It's beautiful," Darian breathed, reaching out to touch a passing jellyfish. "Don't," the siren warned. "Beauty and danger often go hand in hand in these waters." They swam for what felt like hours, descending deeper into the abyss. Just as Elara was beginning to wonder how much further they had to go, she saw lights in the distance. As they drew closer, she realized she was looking at a vast underwater city. Buildings of coral and crystal spiraled upwards, their spires disappearing into the murky depths above. Streets paved with luminous stones wound between the structures, busy with all manner of sea creatures and beings Elara had never seen before. "Welcome," the siren said, "to Atlantis." Elara and Darian floated in awe, taking in the magnificent sight before them. "I thought Atlantis was just a legend," Darian said. The siren's expression turned serious. "Many things you believe to be legend are very real, son of the land, and many truths you hold dear are little more than stories." As they entered the city proper, Ilara noticed the curious and sometimes hostile looks they received from the inhabitants. "Why have you brought us here?" she asked. The siren led them towards a towering palace at the city's center. "Because the balance between land and sea is failing. The ancient treaties are crumbling, and you, Ilara of the coastal kingdoms, may be the key to preventing a war that would destroy both our worlds." Ilara's mind reeled at the implications. "But how? I'm just one person." "You are far more than that," the siren replied cryptically. "Come. The Council of Tides awaits." As they approached the palace gates, Ilara felt a mixture of fear and determination settle in her chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets were about to be revealed, she knew her life would never be the same. Darian squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens," he said, "we face it together." Ilara nodded, grateful for his presence. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to meet her destiny and uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the waves. The Palace of Atlantis was a marvel of aquatic architecture. Corridors of polished mother-of-pearl wound through chambers adorned with living coral and bioluminescent algae. Ilara and Darian followed the siren through this labyrinth, their eyes wide with wonder. As they approached a set of massive doors made from what appeared to be solidified water, the siren turned to them. "Beyond these doors lies the Council of Tides. Speak only when spoken to, and remember, appearances can be deceiving." With a wave of her hand, the doors parted like a curtain of liquid, allowing them entry. The chamber beyond was vast, its domed ceiling lost in the murky depths above. 7 thrones formed a semicircle at the far end, each occupied by a being more bizarre than the last. "Approach," boomed a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. As they swam forward, Ilara studied the council members. To the far left sat a being that appeared to be made entirely of living kelp. Next to it was a creature with the upper body of an octopus and the lower half of a shark. The central throne held a majestic figure that seemed to shift between human and various sea creatures with each passing moment. The being in the center spoke again, its voice resonating through the water. "Ilara of the coastal kingdoms, do you know why you have been brought before us?" Ilara swallowed hard, finding her voice. I believe it has something to do with maintaining balance between land and sea." A ripple of murmurs passed through the council. The octopus-shark hybrid leaned forward, its tentacles writhing. "And what makes you think you, a mere human, could have any bearing on such matters?" Before Ilara could respond, Darian spoke up. "She's not just any human, she's—" "Silence," hissed a counselor that appeared to be a monstrous eel. The land dweller was not addressed. The central figure raised a hand, quieting the others. "Peace, brothers and sisters. Let us reveal to her the truth of her heritage." With a gesture, the water in the center of the chamber began to swirl, forming images that played out like a living mural. Ilara saw a beautiful woman with her own eyes staring back at her. "Your mother," the central figure explained, "was one of us, a guardian of the seas who fell in love with a human king." The images shifted, showing the woman leaving the ocean, legs replacing her tail as she stepped onto land. "But the marriage of land and sea is not without consequences," continued the counselor. "Your birth caused a rift in the ancient magics that maintain the balance between our worlds." Ilara's mind reeled. "But how is that possible? I've lived on land my whole life. I can't even swim very well." The kelp being spoke, its voice like rustling leaves. "The power lies dormant within you, child. But now, as both worlds teeter on the brink of war, that power awakens." "War?" Darian interjected, unable to stay silent. "What war?" The octopus shark growled. "The war your kind has been waging against us for centuries, polluting our waters, decimating our populations, disturbing the very foundations of our realm with your machines." "Enough, Craxus," the central figure said firmly. "We did not bring her here to assign blame." Turning back to Ilara, The figure's form settled into that of a regal merman. You stand at the crossroads of two worlds, Ilara. In your veins runs the blood of both land and sea. Only you can bridge the divide and restore the balance. But how? Ilara asked, her voice small in the vast chamber. The merman's expression softened. That, young one, is what you must discover for yourself. We can guide you, teach you to harness the power within, but the path you take must be your own. Darian moved closer to Ilara, protective. And what if she chooses not to take on this burden? She has a life, responsibilities on land. The eel counselor hissed again. Then both our worlds will fall into chaos and ruin. The choice may be hers, but the consequences will be felt by all. Ilara felt the weight of their words pressing down on her. She thought of her home, her people, the life she had known, but she also felt a pull, a connection to this underwater world she never knew existed. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and met the merman's gaze. I don't fully understand all of this yet, but I know I can't turn my back on either world. I'll do whatever it takes to prevent this war and restore the balance. A smile played at the corners of the merman's mouth. Then let your training begin, for you must learn to master both halves of your heritage if you are to unite our realms. As the council members nodded in agreement, Ilara felt a mix of fear and excitement course through her. She glanced at Darian, seeing the worry in his eyes, but also unwavering support. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices she might have to make, Ilara knew that this was her destiny. The fate of two worlds rested on her shoulders, and she was determined not to let either of them down. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of training and discoveries. Ilara found herself pushed to limits she never knew she had, both physically and mentally. Under the tutelage of various council members, she began to unlock abilities she never dreamed possible. On this particular morning, Ilara stood in a secluded grotto with Nerissa, the kelp-like council member who had taken on the role of her primary instructor. Focus, child, Nerissa's voice rustled through the water. Feel the currents around you. Become one with the flow. Ilara closed her eyes, trying to sense the subtle movements of the water. Slowly she began to feel it, not just against her skin, but as if it were an extension of her very being. Good, Nerissa encouraged. Now direct it. Shape it to your will. Ilara extended her hand, concentrating on the water before her. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, a small whirlpool began to form. Yes, Ilara exclaimed, her eyes flying open in excitement. The moment she lost focus, the whirlpool dissipated. Nerissa nodded approvingly. You're making progress. But remember, control is key. You must maintain your connection even when distracted. From the entrance of the grotto, a familiar voice called out, Impressive, though I'm not sure how useful party tricks will be in preventing a war. Ilara turned to see Darian swimming towards them, a teasing smirk on his face. Despite his light tone, she could see the strain in his eyes. The past few days had been hard on him, a land dweller in an alien world. Darian, Nerissa acknowledged coolly. I trust you're not here to interrupt our lesson? He held up his hands in mock surrender. Not at all. Just came to see how our savior of two worlds is progressing. Ilara shot him a look. Darian, please. You know how important this is. His expression softened. I know. I'm sorry. It's just strange, watching you become this whole other person. Or should I say, half-person? Before Ilara could respond, a loud boom echoed through the water, causing the grotto to shake. Nerissa's form bristled, tendrils of kelp extending in alarm. What was that? Ilara asked, her heart racing. Trouble, Nerissa replied grimly. Come, quickly. They swam rapidly through the twisting corridors of the palace, emerging into the main courtyard. The scene before them was chaos. Atlantean guards were mobilizing while civilians swam in panicked swarms. In the distance, beyond the city's protective barrier, Ilara could see dark shapes moving against the murky backdrop of the open ocean. "What's happening?" Darian asked, his hand instinctively moving to where his sword would be if they were on land. A familiar voice answered, "What we've long feared." The central counselor, who Ilara now knew as Triton, approached them. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with grim determination. "The surface dwellers have found us." Ilara's blood ran cold. "But how? I thought Atlantis was hidden by ancient magic." Triton's expression darkened. "It was. Which means either our defenses have weakened far more than we realized, or someone led them here," Nerissa finished, her voice hard. All eyes turned to Darian, who took a step back, hands raised. "Whoa, don't look at me. I've been here the whole time, same as Ilara." "It doesn't matter now," Triton said, though Ilara noticed he kept a wary eye on Darian. "What matters is protecting the city. Ilara, are you ready to put your training to the test?" Ilara swallowed hard, fear and determination warring within her. I don't know. I've only just started to control my abilities." Nerissa placed a comforting tendril on Ilara's shoulder. "You have more power than you know, child. Trust in yourself, as we trust in you." Another boom shook the city, closer this time. In the distance, Ilara could see flashes of light. Depth charges, she realized with horror. "I don't have a choice, do I?" Ilara said, more to herself than the others. Triton's expression softened slightly. "There is always a choice, Ilara. But sometimes the right choice is also the hardest one." Ilara took a deep breath, steeling herself. She turned to Darian, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "I have to do this," she said softly. He nodded, taking her hand. "I know. And I'll be right beside you, whatever happens." With a grateful squeeze of his hand, Ilara turned back to Triton and Nerissa. "What do you need me to do?" Triton's form shifted, becoming more warrior-like. "We need you to be the bridge you were born to be. Show them that we are not their enemy, that there is more to our world than they could ever imagine." As another explosion rocked the city, Ilara nodded firmly. "Then let's go meet our visitors." With that, they swam towards the city's edge, towards an encounter that would determine the fate of two worlds. Ilara's heart pounded with each stroke, knowing that everything she had learned, everything she was, would be put to the test in the coming moments. The tide of war was rising, and she was the only one who could turn it back. Ilara swam towards the edge of Atlantis, her heart pounding with each powerful stroke. Triton and Nerissa flanked her, while Darian struggled to keep up, still not fully adapted to underwater movement. As they approached the city's shimmering barrier, the true scale of the threat became apparent. A fleet of sleek submarines hovered just beyond the magical dome, their metal hulls a stark contrast to the organic structures of Atlantis. Depth charges exploded against the barrier, each impact sending shockwaves through the water. "The barrier won't hold much longer," Triton said grimly. "Ilara, it's time." Taking a deep breath, Ilara focused on the power within her, feeling the dual nature of her heritage surge through her veins. With a gesture, she created an opening in the barrier large enough for their small group to pass through. As they emerged into open water, a mechanical voice boomed from the nearest submarine. "Unidentified aquatic life forms, you are trespassing in restricted waters. Surrender immediately or we will be forced to take aggressive action." Ilara's voice rang out clear and strong, amplified by her newfound abilities. "We mean you no harm. We request peaceful dialogue." For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with a hiss of equalizing pressure, a hatch on the lead submarine opened. A figure in a sleek diving suit emerged, followed by several armed guards. As the group approached, Ilara gasped in recognition. "Admiral Thorne?" The figure removed their helmet, revealing the stern face of Admiral Elena Thorne, head of the Coastal Kingdom's naval forces, and Ilara's mentor. "Princess Ilara?" Thorne's eyes widened in disbelief, What in the seven seas are you doing here? And what are you? Ilara glanced down at herself, realizing how alien she must appear, her skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns, her hair floating around her like a living thing. It's a long story, Admiral, Ilara said, but please call off your attack. There's so much you don't understand. Thorn's expression hardened. What I understand is that we've discovered a potentially hostile underwater civilization with technology far beyond our own. The Council of Nations has deemed this a threat to global security. The only threat here is your ignorance, Nerissa hissed, her kelp-like form bristling. Triton raised a hand to calm her. What the esteemed counselor means is that there has been a grave misunderstanding. We have lived in these waters for millennia, in harmony with the surface world. Then why hide? Thorn challenged. Why keep your existence a secret? Ilara stepped forward. Because of moments like this, Admiral. Fear of the unknown, of what's different. But it doesn't have to be this way. I'm living proof that our worlds can coexist. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Explain. Over the next few minutes, Ilara gave a condensed version of her heritage and the delicate balance between land and sea. As she spoke, she could see the conflict in Thorn's eyes, the soldier warring with the mentor who had watched Ilara grow up. Even if what you're saying is true, Thorn said slowly, I have my orders. The Council of Nations won't simply take your word for it. Darian, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Then let us prove it to them. Arrange a meeting, representatives from both worlds. Let them see Atlantis for themselves. Thorn considered this for a long moment. And if I refuse? Ilara's expression turned solemn. Then you'll have to go through me to reach Atlantis. I won't let either world be destroyed because of fear and misunderstanding. To demonstrate her point, Ilara raised her hands. The water around them began to churn, creating a swirling vortex that separated the Atlanteans from the submarines. Thorn's guards raised their weapons, but the Admiral held up a hand to stop them. Stand down, she ordered, her eyes never leaving Ilara. After a tense moment, she sighed. You always were stubborn, Princess. Very well. I will arrange a meeting with the Council of Nations. But I warn you, if this is some kind of trick, it's not, Ilara assured her. You have my word. As Thorn retreated to her submarine to make arrangements, Ilara felt a mix of relief and apprehension wash over her. She had prevented immediate conflict, but the real challenge was yet to come. Triton placed a hand on her shoulder. You did well, Ilara, but this is only the beginning. Are you prepared for what comes next? Ilara looked at the retreating submarines, then back at the shimmering city of Atlantis. She thought of her life on land, of the underwater wonders she'd discovered, and of the two worlds that now depended on her. I have to be, she said softly. For everyone's sake. As they swam back towards Atlantis, Ilara's mind raced with the enormity of the task ahead. She had taken the first step towards bridging two worlds, but the journey was far from over. The tides of change were rising, and Ilara knew she would have to be strong enough to ride them wherever they might lead. The Grand Council Chamber of Atlantis had been transformed. Gone were the intimidating thrones of the Council of Tides. In their place stood a circular table, its surface shimmering like the ocean at twilight. Around it sat an eclectic group, the Atlantean Council members, key figures from the Surface World's Council of Nations, and at the center of it all, Ilara. Admiral Thorn sat rigidly in her chair, her eyes darting suspiciously around the room. Beside her was Chancellor Reeves, the head of the Council of Nations, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in concentration as he took in the underwater marvels around him. Triton's voice broke the tense silence. Esteemed guests, we welcome you to Atlantis. We hope that this meeting will mark the beginning of a new era of understanding between our worlds. Chancellor Reeves cleared his throat. Yes. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have many questions and concerns that need to be addressed. Ilara took a deep breath, steeling herself. Of course, Chancellor. That's why we're here. What would you like to know? For starters, Admiral Thorne interjected, how long has this underwater civilization existed without our knowledge? And what are your intentions towards the surface world? Nerissa bristled, her kelp-like form undulating. We have existed here long before your kind learned to float twigs on water. As for our intentions, it is you who have invaded our realm with your machines and pollutants. Elara raised a hand, trying to calm the rising tensions. What Counselor Nerissa means is that Atlantis has a rich history dating back millennia. We've lived in harmony with the ocean and, by extension, the surface world. Our intention has always been peaceful coexistence. Chancellor Reeves leaned forward. Then why the secrecy? Why reveal yourselves now? Triton's form shifted, taking on a more human-like appearance. The balance between our worlds has been disrupted. The ancient magics that kept us hidden have weakened, in part due to the changes your world has wrought upon the oceans. Magic? Thorne scoffed. You expect us to believe in fairy tales? Elara stood, her eyes flashing. With a wave of her hand, the water in the center of the table rose, forming intricate shapes and patterns. Is this a fairy tale, Admiral? The power that flows through Atlantis through me is as real as the technology that brought you here. A murmur ran through the surface world delegates. Chancellor Reeves stroked his beard thoughtfully. Fascinating. And you, Princess Elara? You. The Grand Assembly Hall of Atlantis buzzed with tension. On one side sat the Council of Tides, their otherworldly forms a stark contrast to the human delegation opposite them. Elara stood in the center, feeling the weight of both worlds on her shoulders. Admiral Thorne led the surface delegation, her crisp uniform out of place among the flowing shapes of the underwater city. Beside her sat representatives from various coastal nations, their eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and suspicion. Triton's voice rang out, initiating the proceedings. We welcome our guests from the surface world. May this historic meeting mark the beginning of a new era of understanding between our peoples. A murmur rippled through the human delegation. One of them, a sharp-featured man Elara recognized as Counselor Werner from her own kingdom, spoke up. Understanding? You've hidden an entire civilization from us for centuries. How can we trust anything you say? Nerissa bristled, her kelp-like form undulating with agitation. Trust. It is we who have suffered the consequences of your surface-dwelling ignorance. Our waters polluted, our people hunted. Enough. Elara's voice cut through the rising tensions. All eyes turned to her. This is precisely why we're here, to move beyond suspicion and blame, to forge a path forward together. Admiral Thorne nodded approvingly. The princess, Elara, is right. We've seen wonders here that defy explanation. Clearly, there's much our worlds can learn from each other. Learn or exploit? The eel-like counselor hissed. How do we know you won't use this knowledge against us? Counselor Werner scoffed. Rich, coming from those who've been spying on us from the depths for who knows how long. The assembly erupted into shouts and accusations. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the currents of the water around her, the ebb and flow of emotions in the room. When she opened them again, her gaze was steely with determination. With a gesture, she created a swirling vortex of water in the center of the hall, silencing everyone. Look at yourselves. Her voice echoed with power she was only beginning to understand. Land and sea, human and Atlantean, we're all acting like children squabbling over a tide pool while the entire ocean is at stake. The vortex dissipated, leaving stunned silence in its wake. Elara continued, her voice softer, but no less intense. I am the daughter of both your worlds. I've seen the beauty and the flaws in each. Yes, there's been hurt and mistrust on both sides, but there's also so much potential. She turned to the human delegation. Imagine medical breakthroughs inspired by creatures that thrive in the deepest trenches. Then to the Atlanteans. Think of the pollution and overfishing that could be prevented with our combined knowledge. Darian, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Elara's right. I've seen both sides too. There's more that unites us than divides us. Admiral Thorne considered this, then spoke. What do you propose, Ilara? Ilara took a deep breath. An exchange program. Let select individuals from each world experience the other. Scientists, artists, diplomats, people who can bridge the gap and foster understanding. Triton nodded slowly. An intriguing idea. But the logistics can be worked out, Ilara finished. What matters is taking the first step. The assembly hall filled with murmurs as both sides considered the proposal. Finally, Councillor Verne spoke. It's risky, but potentially rewarding. I move that we form a joint committee to explore the feasibility of this exchange program. To Ilara's relief, nods of agreement came from both sides of the hall. It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a start. As the meeting adjourned and smaller groups began to form for further discussion, Admiral Thorne approached Ilara. You've grown, Princess, in more ways than one. Ilara smiled wryly. I've had to. There's so much at stake. Thorne's expression turned serious. Indeed, and while you've bought us time, don't think for a moment that everyone up there, she gestured towards the surface, will be as open to this as we've been. There are those who will see Atlantis as a threat, no matter what. I know, Ilara sighed, but we have to try, for both our worlds. As she watched humans and Atlanteans cautiously beginning to interact, Ilara felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with diplomatic hurdles and potential dangers. But for the first time since discovering her heritage, she felt like she truly belonged to both worlds, and was uniquely positioned to bring them together. The tide of change was rising, and Ilara was determined to ensure it lifted all boats, whether they sailed on the surface or swam in the depths below. 3 months had passed since the historic meeting between the surface world and Atlantis. The exchange program, dubbed Project Confluence, was in full swing. Ilara found herself constantly moving between two worlds, mediating conflicts, explaining cultural differences, and pushing for progress. On this particular day, she stood on the deck of a research vessel watching as a team of human scientists prepared to descend in a specially designed submersible. Beside her, Darian fidgeted uncomfortably in his wetsuit. Remind me again why I agreed to this, he muttered. Ilara smiled, nudging him playfully. Because you're my stalwart protector, remember? Can't very well do that if you're afraid of a little water. A little water? Darian scoffed. We're talking about the bottom of the ocean. Their banter was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Mira Chen, the lead scientist for this expedition. Princess Ilara, we're ready to begin the descent. Are you sure you won't join us in the submersible? Ilara shook her head. Thank you, but no. I'll meet you down there. Someone needs to make sure our Atlantean hosts are prepared for your arrival. As the science team boarded the submersible, Ilara turned to Darian. Last chance to back out. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Not a chance. Let's do this. With a nod, Ilara dove into the water, Darian following close behind. As they submerged, Ilara felt the familiar tingle of her transformation. Her legs fused into a powerful tail, gills opening along her neck. She turned to see Darian struggling to adjust to the specialized breathing apparatus they'd developed for surface dwellers. You okay? She asked, her voice clear in the water. Darian gave a shaky thumbs up. Just getting used to it. Lead the way. They swam deeper, Ilara easily outpacing the descending submersible. As they approached the outskirts of Atlantis, they were met by Nerissa and a group of Atlantean scientists. Welcome back, Ilara, Nerissa greeted, her kelp-like form swaying gently in the current. I trust our surface visitors are on their way? Ilara nodded. They are. How are preparations coming along? Before Nerissa could answer, a commotion from within the city caught their attention. A group of Atlanteans was approaching, led by Craxus, the octopus-shark hybrid counselor who had been vocally opposed to the exchange program. Ilara, Craxus called out, his tentacles writhing agitatedly. We've just received word. There's been an incident. Ilara's heart sank. What kind of incident? A human fishing vessel, Craxus spat. They've dropped nets in a protected spawning ground. Hundreds of our younglings are trapped. Darian, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. It might be an accident. Many surface fishermen don't know about the protected areas yet. Craxus turned on him, eyes flashing. Accident or not, the damage is done. This is exactly why we should never have revealed ourselves. Ilara raised her hands, trying to calm the situation. Let's not jump to conclusions. Where is this happening? The Coral Crescent, Nerissa supplied. About 10 miles from here. Ilara's mind raced. The submersible with the human scientists would be arriving any minute. If they surfaced in the middle of this conflict... Okay, here's what we're going to do, Ilara said, her voice ringing with authority. Nerissa, please escort the human scientists to the city when they arrive. Explain the situation, but assure them they're safe. She turned to Craxus. Counselor, I need you to gather a team to help free the trapped younglings. No aggressive actions against the fishing vessel. Understood? Craxus looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded grudgingly. Darian and I will go to the surface and communicate with the fishing vessel, Ilara continued. We'll make sure they understand the situation and withdraw peacefully. As the groups dispersed to their tasks, Darian swam closer to Ilara. You really think we can resolve this without it turning into an international incident? Ilara sighed, the weight of her responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. We have to. Everything we've worked for these past months hangs in the balance. They swam swiftly towards the Coral Crescent, the vibrant colors of the reef blurring past them. As they neared the surface, Ilara could see the dark shape of the fishing vessel above. Ready? She asked Darian. He nodded, adjusting his breathing apparatus. Right behind you. With powerful strokes, Ilara propelled herself upwards, breaking the surface beside the boat. She could hear shouts of surprise from the deck. Attention, fishing vessel, she called out, her voice carrying across the waves. This is Princess Ilara of the Coastal Kingdoms. You've entered a protected marine area. We need to speak immediately. As faces appeared at the railing, a mixture of shock and disbelief evident, Ilara steeled herself for the diplomatic challenge ahead. The next few moments would be crucial in maintaining the fragile peace between land and sea. The tide of change was churning into rapids, and Ilara found herself once again at the heart of the storm, fighting to keep both her worlds afloat. The fishing boat's captain, a weathered man with salt and pepper hair, leaned over the railing, his eyes wide with disbelief. By the gods, you're real. Ilara treaded water, her tail moving gracefully beneath the surface. I assure you, Captain, I'm very real, and we have an urgent situation to address. The captain shook his head as if trying to clear it. I don't understand. What's going on? Your nets, Darian called out, bobbing in the water beside Ilara. They're in a protected spawning ground. Hundreds of young sea creatures are trapped. A flicker of understanding crossed the captain's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. We had no idea. These are our traditional fishing grounds. We've worked these waters for generations. Ilara raised a hand placatingly. I understand, Captain. But things have changed. There's so much more to these waters than you know. Just then, a young sailor rushed to the captain's side, whispering urgently in his ear. The captain's expression darkened. You're not the only ones who've shown up, he said grimly. We've got company. Ilara turned to see a sleek military vessel approaching rapidly. Her heart sank as she recognized the insignia of the Coastal Kingdom's naval forces. This is going to complicate things, Darian muttered. Ilara nodded, her mind racing. Captain, I need you to trust me. Can you hold your position and not pull up your nets just yet? The captain hesitated, then nodded. Aye, we can do that, but I hope you know what you're doing, lass. Ilara turned to Darian. I need you to go back down and help Craxus with freeing the trapped creatures. Try to keep him calm and prevent any aggressive actions. Darian looked concerned. Are you sure? What about you? I'll handle things up here, Ilara assured him. Go. They need you down there. With a reluctant nod, Darian dove beneath the waves. Ilara took a deep breath, then swam towards the approaching military vessel. As she neared, she recognized the figure standing at the bow, Admiral Thorn. Admiral, Ilara called out. This isn't what it looks like. Thorn's voice carried across the water, tense and authoritative. Stand down, Ilara. This is a military matter now. Ilara pulled herself up onto the ship's ladder, her tail transforming back into legs as she emerged from the water. She climbed aboard, facing Thorn directly. With all due respect, Admiral, this is exactly the kind of situation the exchange program was meant to prevent, Ilara said firmly. Thorn's expression was a mixture of concern and frustration. Ilara, we've received reports of unauthorized contact between surface vessels and underwater entities. The Council of Nations is concerned that the terms of our agreement are being violated. Ilara's mind whirled. Someone had been feeding misinformation to the surface governments, trying to sabotage the fragile peace. Admiral, please, give me a chance to explain, Ilara pleaded. There's been a misunderstanding, but we can resolve this peacefully. Thorn hesitated, years of military training warring with her trust in Ilara. Finally, she nodded. You have 5 minutes. Ilara quickly outlined the situation, the accidental netting of the spawning ground, the Atlantean rescue effort underway, and the fishing boat's cooperation. As she spoke, a commotion erupted from the fishing vessel. They turned to see Craxus surfacing, his tentacles writhing in agitation. The younglings are free, he announced, but the damage to the reef is extensive. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the military ship. More surface dwellers. Is this an invasion? Stand down, Counselor, Ilara commanded, her voice ringing with authority. No one is invading anyone. She turned to Thorn. Admiral, this is Counselor Craxus of Atlantis, Counselor Admiral Thorn of the Coastal Kingdoms. The two sized each other up, tension thick in the air. Ilara continued. What we have here is an opportunity. Admiral, you've seen firsthand the beings we share these waters with. Counselor, you've witnessed the willingness of the surface dwellers to cooperate when informed. She looked between them. We can turn this incident into a template for future cooperation. Joint patrols to prevent accidental intrusions, education programs for fishing communities, collaborative research to ensure sustainable practices. Thorn considered this, her tactical mind assessing the possibilities. It could work, but the Council of Nations will need assurances. Craxus bristled. And what assurances do we get that your kind won't exploit this knowledge? Ilara stepped between them. That's where I come in. As a bridge between both worlds, I can help establish protocols, mediate disputes, and ensure transparency on both sides. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the lapping of waves against the hulls. Then, slowly, Thorn extended her hand towards Craxus. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could start with a joint investigation into this incident, to establish the facts and determine a fair resolution. Craxus eyed the offered hand warily, then extended a tentacle to shake it. Agreed, but we will be watching closely. As the tension began to dissipate, Ilara felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. The path to true understanding between land and sea would be long and fraught with challenges, but moments like this proved it was possible. As she looked out over the meeting of two worlds, ships and sea creatures, humans and Atlanteans, Ilara knew that her journey was far from over. But with each challenge faced and overcome, the tides of change were slowly but surely turning towards a brighter, more united future. The Grand Council chamber of the Coastal Kingdoms buzzed with tension. Ilara stood before the assembled representatives, her posture tall, but her heart racing. The events at the Coral Crescent had sparked a firestorm of debate and controversy, and now she faced her greatest diplomatic challenge yet. Princess Ilara, began Counselor Verna, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. You stand before us today to answer for your actions, actions which many feel have put our kingdom at risk. Ilara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Honorable counselors, I understand your concerns, but I assure you, everything I've done has been in service of both our worlds. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Another counselor, an elderly woman named Maris, spoke up. And yet, reports suggest you sided with these Atlanteans over our own fishing vessels. How do you explain that? I sided with no one, Ilara replied firmly. I mediated a conflict to prevent escalation. The fishing vessel had unknowingly entered protected waters. The Atlanteans were rightfully concerned about their ecosystem. By facilitating communication, we avoided a potential disaster. Admiral Thorne, standing to the side, nodded in agreement. I can vouch for the princess's actions. Her quick thinking prevented what could have become an international incident. Counselor Verne scoffed. International? These creatures aren't a nation, they're a security threat. Who knows what other secrets they're hiding in the depths? Ilara felt her temper flare but forced herself to remain calm. Counselor, with all due respect, that kind of thinking is exactly what we're trying to move beyond. The Atlanteans have lived alongside us for millennia. They're not a threat, they're potential allies. Allies? Verne laughed bitterly. And what of the reports of their advanced technology? Their ability to manipulate water itself? How long before they decide to turn those abilities against us? The chamber erupted into heated debate. Ilara glanced at Darian, who stood supportively nearby, and he gave her an encouraging nod. Enough! Ilara's voice rang out, amplified by a power she was still learning to control. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her in shock. In the sudden quiet, Ilara spoke, her voice clear and determined. Look at me. I am the living bridge between our worlds. Atlantean and human blood flows through my veins. I have walked on land and swum in the deepest trenches, and I tell you now there is far more that unites us than divides us. She gestured to the windows, beyond which the sea sparkled in the sunlight. Out there lies a world of wonder and possibility. Yes, there are challenges to overcome. Yes, there will be misunderstandings and conflicts, but imagine what we could achieve together. Medical breakthroughs from deep-sea organisms, sustainable fishing practices that benefit both our peoples, protection against the rising threats of climate change and ocean pollution. Ilara's gaze swept the room, meeting each counselor's eyes. The world is changing, whether we like it or not. We can choose to face that change together, pooling our knowledge and resources, or we can retreat into fear and isolationism. I know which path I choose. A long moment of silence followed her words. Then, surprisingly, it was Counselor Maris who spoke. The princess speaks with wisdom beyond her years. Perhaps it's time we old folks listen to the voice of the future. Slowly, nods of agreement began to spread through the chamber. Even Counselor Verne, though he still looked skeptical, seemed to be considering her words. The head of the council, a stern-faced man named Aldrich, raised his hand for silence. You've given us much to think about, Princess Ilara. We will need time to deliberate on the path forward. But know this, your actions, while controversial, have opened our eyes to possibilities we never imagined. For that, at least, you have our gratitude. As the council adjourned, Darian approached Ilara, a proud smile on his face. That was incredible. You really are the bridge between worlds. Ilara exhaled deeply, the tension of the moment finally releasing. It's a start, but we have a long way to go. Admiral Thorne joined them, her expression thoughtful. Indeed we do, but you've given us a foundation to build on. The question now is, what's our next move? Ilara gazed out the window towards the sea that held so many secrets and possibilities. Now, she said softly, we prepare for the real work to begin. Because somewhere out there, in the depths we've only begun to explore, lie the keys to our shared future. And I intend to find them. As they left the council chamber, Alara felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. The tides of change were flowing stronger than ever, and she stood at the heart of the current. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, for the sake of both her worlds and the uncharted waters that lay between them. The Atlantean research facility buzzed with activity. Alara moved through the coral-lined corridors, marveling at the seamless blend of organic architecture and advanced technology. She was here to oversee the first joint human-Atlantean scientific expedition, a crucial step in building trust between the two worlds. As she entered the main laboratory, she was greeted by Dr. Mira Chen, the lead human scientist, and Zale, her Atlantean counterpart. The two were hunched over a holographic display, arguing animatedly. "I'm telling you, the data doesn't make sense," Dr. Chen insisted, her brow furrowed in frustration. Zale, his scales shimmering with agitation, retorted, "And I'm telling you, your surface instruments must be faulty. Our readings are clear." Alara cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "Is there a problem?" Dr. Chen straightened up, pushing her glasses back into place. "Princess Alara, I'm glad you're here. We've detected some anomalies in the deep-sea thermal vent we've been studying." "Anomalies?" Alara asked, swimming closer to examine the holographic display. Zale nodded, his fin-like ears twitching. "Yes, unusual energy signatures that don't match any known natural phenomena. Dr. Chen believes it's evidence of, what did you call it? Geothermal manipulation," Dr. Chen supplied. "As if someone or something is artificially altering the vent's output." Alara frowned, a sense of unease growing in her gut. "Could it be natural variations?" "Unlikely," Zale admitted reluctantly. "The patterns are too regular, too controlled." Just then, Darian burst into the lab, his expression grave. "Alara, we have a situation. A human submarine has been detected approaching the outer boundaries of Atlantis." Ilara's heart sank. "Military?" Darian shook his head. "Worse. It's a private vessel, registered to Ocean Corp." "The Deep Sea Mining Company?" Dr. Chen gasped. "What are they doing here?" Ilara's mind raced. Ocean Corp had been one of the most vocal opponents of the Human-Atlantean Alliance, citing concerns about resource competition. Their presence here couldn't be a coincidence. "Zale, I need you to alert the Council of Tides," Alara commanded. "Dr. Chen, gather all the data you have on these anomalies. Darian, you're with me." As they swam swiftly towards the city's outer defenses, Alara filled Darian in on the situation. "I think we've stumbled onto something bigger than we realized. Those energy anomalies, Ocean Corp's sudden appearance, it can't be chance." Darian nodded grimly. "You think they're connected? But how?" Before Alara could respond, they arrived at the defense perimeter. Triton was already there, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained anger. "Alara, thank the tides you're here," he said. "The surface vessel is demanding entry, claiming they have legitimate business interests to discuss." "Let me handle this," Alara said, swimming towards the communication array. She activated the long-range transmitter, her voice carrying through the water. "This is Princess Alara of the Coastal Kingdoms and emissary to Atlantis. Ocean Corp vessel, you are in restricted waters. State your purpose immediately." A smooth, cultured voice responded, sending chills down Alara's spine. "Ah, the famous princess herself. How delightful. This is Cassius Blackwell, CEO of Ocean Corp. We've detected some rather interesting energy signatures in this region and thought we'd investigate. Purely scientific curiosity, you understand." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Blackwell, this area is protected under international treaty. You have no authority to conduct investigations here." Blackwell's laugh crackled through the speakers. "My dear princess, authority is such a fluid concept, especially in international waters. But perhaps we could discuss this in person? I'm sure we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement." Triton bristled beside her. "This is an outrage. We should expel them immediately." Alara held up a hand, her mind working furiously. Denying them outright could escalate the situation, but allowing them entry could be dangerous. Then, an idea struck her. "Mr. Blackwell," she said carefully, "I propose a compromise. You may send a small delegation to meet with us at a neutral location outside the city, but your vessel must remain at its current position. Any attempt to move closer will be seen as an act of aggression. Do you accept these terms?" There was a long pause before Blackwell responded. "Very well, Princess, we accept. I look forward to our little chat." As the transmission ended, Darian turned to Alara, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure about this? It could be a trap." Alara nodded, her expression determined. "It's definitely a trap, but it's also our best chance to find out what's really going on. Whatever game OceanCorp is playing, it's time we learned the rules." As they prepared for the meeting, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone imagined. The peaceful coexistence between land and sea that she had worked so hard to build was about to face its greatest test yet. The calm before the storm was over. Now, the true depths of deception were about to be revealed, and Alara knew that the choices she made in the coming hours would shape the fate of both her worlds for generations to come. The neutral meeting point was an ancient, long-abandoned temple on the outskirts of Atlantean territory. Its weathered stone columns stretched upwards, disappearing into the murky depths above. Alara waited with Triton and Darian, tension thick in the water around them. "I don't like this," Darian muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Triton nodded in agreement. "Nor do I, but Alara is right. We need answers." Before Alara could respond, movement caught her eye. A sleek submersible approached, its lights cutting through the dim waters. As it neared, a hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged in high-tech diving suits. The leader removed his helmet, revealing a handsome, middle-aged man with piercing blue eyes and a disarming smile. "Princess Alara, I presume. Cassius Blackwell, at your service." Alara nodded coolly. "Mr. Blackwell, you've gone to great lengths to arrange this meeting. I suggest we dispense with pleasantries and get to the point." Blackwell's smile didn't waver. Direct. "I like that. Very well, let's talk business. OceanCorp has detected significant energy readings in this region. Readings that could revolutionize the energy industry as we know it." "Those readings," Triton interjected, "are from protected Atlantean territories. They are not for exploitation by surface dwellers." Blackwell turned his gaze to Triton, his expression hardening slightly. "And yet the oceans belong to all of humanity. Or have you forgotten that in your centuries of hiding?" Alara raised a hand, silencing what would surely have been a heated retort from Triton. "Mr. Blackwell, whatever you've detected, it's part of a delicate ecosystem that's taken millennia to develop. We can't allow..." "Can't allow?" Blackwell interrupted, his tone sharpening. "My dear princess, I don't think you understand the position you're in. We're not asking for permission." The water around them seemed to grow colder as the true nature of the meeting became clear. Darian stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that a threat?" Blackwell's 2 companions tensed, hands moving to their belts. Blackwell himself, however, remained calm. "Not a threat, a reality. You see, while you've been playing diplomat, we've been busy. Those energy signatures, we've not only detected them, we've learned to replicate them." Alara's eyes widened as the implications hit her. "The thermal vent anomalies. That was you?" Blackwell nodded, a look of triumph on his face. "A small demonstration of what we're capable of. Imagine it, Princess. The power to control the very currents of the ocean, to raise temperatures, to lower them, to create storms or calm them at will." "You're insane," Triton breathed. "You have no idea of the damage you could cause." "Damage?" Blackwell laughed. "I'm talking about progress, about finally harnessing the true power of the oceans. And if Atlantis won't cooperate, well, perhaps it's time for a changing of the tides, so to speak." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. You're talking about war? Blackwell shrugged. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation. Join us, Princess. With your knowledge of both worlds, think of what we could achieve together. For a moment, silence reigned in the ancient temple. Ilara's mind raced, weighing options, considering consequences. When she spoke, her voice was steady, filled with a quiet strength. Mr. Blackwell, you speak of progress, but what you propose is nothing short of destruction. The oceans are not a resource to be exploited. They're a living system, one that we're all a part of. Your demonstrations have already caused damage you can't begin to comprehend. She swam closer to him, her eyes locked on his. I will not join you, and I will not allow you to threaten the balance we've worked so hard to achieve. Leave these waters now, or face the combined might of both our worlds. Blackwell's facade of friendliness fell away, replaced by cold anger. You're making a grave mistake, Princess. You can't stop what's coming. Perhaps not alone, Ilara replied. But I'm not alone, am I? As if on cue, the water around them began to churn. From the shadows of the temple emerged Atlantean warriors, led by Craxus. From above, the distinct sound of ship engines could be heard, the coastal kingdom's navy, alerted by Darian's silent signal. Blackwell's eyes darted around, realizing he was outmaneuvered. This isn't over, he snarled, signaling his companions to retreat to their submersible. As OceanCorp's vessel disappeared into the gloom, Ilara turned to her allies. We've won this battle, but the war is just beginning. Blackwell will be back, and next time, he won't bother with negotiations. Triton nodded gravely. What do you propose? Ilara's expression was one of grim determination. We prepare, we unite our forces, pool our knowledge, and we find a way to neutralize whatever technology OceanCorp has developed. The future of both our worlds depends on it. As they swam back towards Atlantis, Ilara felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. The peaceful coexistence she had dreamed of seemed further away than ever. But as she looked at the determined faces of her allies, human and Atlantean alike, she felt a glimmer of hope. The tides of war might be rising, but so too was the strength of their united front. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, guardians of the deep and protectors of the delicate balance that sustained all life on their blue planet. The war room of Atlantis hummed with tension. Holographic displays flickered, showing maps of ocean currents, thermal readings, and the last known locations of OceanCorp vessels. Ilara stood at the center, surrounded by an unlikely alliance of Atlantean counselors, human scientists, and military strategists from the surface. Our deep-sea sensors have detected unusual activity near the Mariana Trench, reported Zale, his fin-like ears twitching nervously. It appears OceanCorp is establishing some kind of base there. Admiral Thorne leaned forward, her brow furrowed. The Mariana Trench? That's one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. What could they possibly hope to achieve there? Dr. Chen adjusted her glasses, studying the data. Whatever it is, it's big. The energy readings are off the charts. Ilara closed her eyes, feeling the currents of the ocean in her mind. Something felt off. There's more to this than just energy harvesting. Blackwell spoke of controlling the currents, of manipulating the very heart of the ocean. Craxus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. The heart of the abyss. It can't be. All eyes turned to the octopus-shark hybrid. Triton's voice was sharp with concern. Counselor, what are you talking about? Craxus moved to the center of the room, his tentacles manipulating the holographic display. There's an ancient legend, one that even most Atlanteans believe to be nothing more than a myth. It speaks of a power source deep within the Earth, where the planet's molten core meets the crushing depths of the ocean, the heart of the abyss. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Ilara was the first to speak. And you think this is what OceanCorp is after? Craxus nodded grimly. If they've somehow learned of its existence and found a way to tap into its power, The consequences could be catastrophic. Darian, who had been pacing at the edge of the room, stepped forward. But how? How could they have discovered something that even Atlantis thought was just a legend? Dr. Chen's eyes widened with sudden realization. The thermal vent anomalies. They weren't just demonstrations of their technology. They were tests, probing for weaknesses, searching for the heart. Admiral Thorne's voice was steel. The ancient Atlantean archives were a marvel to behold. Towering shelves of crystalline tablets stretched as far as the eye could see, each one containing millennia of knowledge and history. Ilara swam slowly through the cavernous space, her fingers trailing reverently over the glowing inscriptions. "I still can't believe this place exists," Darian murmured beside her, his eyes wide with wonder. Ilara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's amazing, isn't it? All the secrets of the deep preserved for generations." Their quiet appreciation was interrupted by the arrival of Nerissa, the kelp-like Atlantean elder. "Have you found anything useful?" she asked, her fronds swaying gently in the current. Ilara shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "Not yet. We've been searching for hours, but there's no mention of technology similar to what OceanCorp has developed." "Perhaps we're looking in the wrong place," Darian suggested. "If this is ancient knowledge, maybe we should be focusing on legends or myths rather than scientific records." Nerissa's eyes lit up. "The young surface dweller may be onto something. Come, there's a section you need to see." She led them deeper into the archives to a secluded alcove where the tablets seemed older, their glow dimmer. Nerissa gestured to a particular shelf. "These contain our oldest legends, tales passed down from the very founding of Atlantis." As Ilara began to examine the tablets, her eyes widened. "This one mentions a great cataclysm, a time when the seas rose and continents sank." Darian peered over her shoulder. "The Great Flood? But that's just a myth, isn't it?" Nerissa shook her head solemnly. "To your people, perhaps, but to us, it is history, the event that led to the founding of Atlantis." Ilara continued reading, her voice growing more excited. "It says here that the cataclysm was caused by a device? A technology that could control the very waters of the world." "By the tides," Nerissa gasped. "Could this be what OceanCorp has rediscovered?" Darian's brow furrowed. "But if this technology existed in ancient times, why isn't it common knowledge? Why didn't the Atlanteans use it?" Ilara scrolled further through the tablet, her expression growing grave. "Because of the consequences, listen to this. And lo, the waters rose at their command, swallowing the lands of the surface. But in their hubris, they knew not what they had unleashed. The seas grew angry, the earth shook, and all that they had built was cast into the depths." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. "We have to stop them," Darian said firmly. "If OceanCorp fully activates this technology, they could cause another worldwide catastrophe." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. "But how? We don't even know where their base of operations is." Nerissa's fronds rustled thoughtfully. "Perhaps the answer lies in the past as well. If this technology caused the Great Cataclysm, there must have been a way to stop it, to restore balance." Ilara turned back to the tablets, scanning quickly. "Here. It mentions a counterbalance, a way to calm the angry seas. But it's vague. Something about the heart of the ocean and the tears of the earth." "Riddles within riddles," Darian sighed. "Can't anything ever be straightforward?" Despite the gravity of the situation, Ilara couldn't help but smile at his frustration. "Where would the fun be in that? Besides, we've faced worse odds before." She turned to Nerissa, her expression serious once more. "We need to convene the Council of Tides and the Surface World representatives. They need to know what we've discovered." Nerissa nodded. "I'll make the arrangements, but Ilara, be cautious. Knowledge like this, it could spark conflict between our peoples if not handled delicately." "I understand," Ilara replied. "But we don't have the luxury of keeping secrets anymore. Not with what's at stake." As they swam out of the archives, Darian caught Ilara's hand. "Hey, Are you okay? This is a lot to process. Alara squeezed his hand gratefully. I'm fine. It's just, sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Uncovering these ancient secrets, risking the balance between our worlds. Darian's eyes met hers, full of warmth and determination. We don't have a choice. Ocean Corp forced our hand. But if anyone can navigate these treacherous waters, it's you. Alara took a deep breath, drawing strength from his confidence. You're right. We've come too far to turn back now. Whatever challenges lie ahead, whatever secrets we uncover, we'll face them together. As they made their way to inform the councils, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and the fate of both their worlds hung in the balance. But with allies like Darian by her side, and the combined wisdom of land and sea at her disposal, Alara felt ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. The war room of Atlantis hummed with tension. Holographic displays flickered, showing the movements of Ocean Corp vessels across the world's oceans. Alara stood at the center, her face etched with worry as she addressed the assembled leaders from both land and sea. The situation is worse than we feared, she began, her voice steady, despite the gravity of her words. Ocean Corp has activated their weather manipulation devices in key locations across the globe. We're seeing unprecedented storm systems forming, ocean temperatures fluctuating wildly, and entire ecosystems on the brink of collapse. Admiral Thorne stepped forward, her uniform crisp despite the humid underwater environment. Our naval forces are stretched thin trying to contain the damage. Coastal cities are being evacuated, but it's chaos out there. Craxus, his tentacles writhing with agitation, interjected, and beneath the waves, it's no better. Entire coral reefs are bleaching in a matter of days. Migration patterns are disrupted. If this continues, the ocean's food chain will collapse. Murmurs of dismay rippled through the gathering. Darian, standing by Alara's side, spoke up. There has to be a way to shut down their devices. Dr. Chen, have you made any progress? The scientist shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. We've identified the energy signature, but neutralizing it is proving challenging. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. When she opened them, there was a new determination in her gaze. We're running out of time. We need to strike at the heart of Ocean Corp's operation. And where might that be? Triton asked, his usually calm demeanor strained. Here, Alara said, manipulating the holographic display. The image zoomed in on a location in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Our intelligence suggests this is their primary control center. A mobile platform, heavily guarded and shielded. Admiral Thorne studied the image, her tactical mind already at work. A frontal assault would be suicide. Their defenses are too strong. Agreed, Alara nodded. Which is why we're not going to attack it. We're going to infiltrate it. The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, some supportive, others skeptical. Darian placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, his voice low. You're talking about going in yourself, aren't you? Alara met his gaze, a sad smile on her lips. I have to, Darian. I'm the only one who can move seamlessly between land and sea. And I think I might be the key to shutting down their system. What do you mean? Craxus demanded, overhearing their exchange. Alara took a deep breath before addressing the room. In my studies of the ancient Atlantean texts, I've come across references to a power that exists in those of mixed heritage, the ability to harmonize the energies of land and sea. I believe I might be able to counteract Ocean Corp's technology. Silence fell over the gathering as the implications sank in. It was Triton who finally spoke, his voice heavy with concern. Alara, if you're right, using such power could be incredibly dangerous. For you, and for the balance of our worlds. I know, Alara replied softly. But what choice do we have? Every moment we wait, more damage is done. Admiral Thorne stepped forward, her expression resolute. If we're doing this, you're not going alone. I'll assemble a small team of our best operatives to accompany you. Kraxus surprisingly nodded in agreement. As will I. You'll need Atlantean warriors by your side. As the room buzzed with renewed purpose, plans being formulated and teams assembled, Darian pulled Alara aside. I don't like this, he said, his voice tight with worry. It feels like we're gambling everything on a legend. Alara placed a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle. Sometimes, Darian, legends are all we have to light the way forward. But I'm not just relying on ancient texts. I can feel this power growing inside me. It's like the ocean itself is calling to me, showing me the way. Darian covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back. Ilara's smile was tinged with sadness. I promise I'll do everything in my power to return, and to set things right. As they rejoined the others, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from despair to determined focus. Plans were being made, resources allocated, and a spark of hope had reignited in the eyes of those gathered. Ilara looked around at the faces of her allies, human and Atlantean, soldiers and scientists, friends and former foes united in a common cause. Whatever lay ahead, whatever sacrifices might be required, she knew that this was the moment everything had been leading to. The eye of the storm was upon them, and in its calm center, Alara stood ready to face her destiny, to bridge the gap between worlds, and to fight for the future of the planet they all called home.